just let you talk a little bit more about the community group as you get started, but I'll just hand it over to you. How's that?
Yeah, great. So glad to be here, and thanks for that introduction, Marcia. I'll give a little bit more of an introduction about my current role and what I'm doing, but this community group is such an important part of the higher education analytics community. We have probably a list of nearly 800 members. The Slack has 500 people in the general forum, which is really wonderful. As Marcia said, I was the co-chair this last year along with Linda Fang. And Linda is going to be outgoing chair this coming year. Marcia is the current chair. But I've served with this group now and I'm done now as of this month. Was on this group for about 5 years, and it's been such a joy to serve with this group. If you are here because you're a member of this community group, then this slide isn't relevant to you, but we know that we're often joined by people who are not yet members of the community group. And the goal is to promote, educate, and further a network of practitioners who really care about student success analytics, and then to just improve our general success as practitioners. So there's a tiny URL there that you can follow, and that is active. I'm going to actually put a whole bunch of resource links in the chat for the entire webinar. The first resource link in the chat is the tiny URL that will take you to a sign-up page. If you're not yet a member of the Student Success Analytics Community Group and would like to become one, that is the link to follow. It requires you to create an EDUCAUSE profile. You don't have to be an EDUCAUSE member. EDUCAUSE profile and EDUCAUSE membership are two separate things. So you must have an EDUCAUSE profile to be part of the community group. You don't have to be a paid member, and you don't have to be a member, an employee of a member institution in order to have a profile. And the group is open and free at the point of everything. So really pleased to share that. Marcia, did you have anything else you wanted to add about that?
No, it's wonderful that you mentioned that you don't have to be an EDUCAUSE member or part of a organization that is an EDUCAUSE member in order to be a part of this group. We do a lot of work together, and we're always looking for people to engage with us in conversations in Slack or in the Connect group, and work on projects too. So there's so many opportunities to network and build your network of professional contacts through this group.
Yeah. So let's get into the content. By way of introduction, so I'm Mitch Culver, Vice President at Civitas Learning. I'm Vice President for Community Practice, have been in that position for about a year and 6 months. Previous to that, for 5 years, I was at Utah State University as the founding director of the Center for Student Analytics, and have been in higher education and kind of in orbit around higher education since about 2007. My PhD is actually in curriculum and instruction and higher education research and leadership. But I was previously trained as a counselor. A lot of people see my thick glasses and they hear me talking data and they think that I'm a data nerd. I am not. I'm a human beings nerd. I love human potential. I was in student affairs for a long time. I'm really good at serving free pizza to students. I'm really good at building balloon arches. But I got into analytics in higher education partly because I was working on a PhD and had an emphasis in statistics and research and social science. But because there was a role opening up at Utah State, because we were becoming analytics savvy, and they needed someone kind of diplomatic to lead that. And so I was as much a diplomat at Utah State University as I was the senior data analyst at Utah State. So the Center for Student Analytics was formulated around this notion, while I was there, was formulated around this notion that analytics could be used to drive optimization at the university, that it would require enhanced or increased collaboration amongst the various units, and that ultimately we had to have a student focus, which is why student is in the title, and that it always needed to be governed and driven by student outcomes. We were a contract partner of Civitas. I should disclaim, I'm an employee of Civitas. Some of what I'm going to be talking about is how Utah State got good things from Civitas, But in my current role, I'm able to help a lot of institutions, work individually with a lot of institutions. And so I'm able to see a broad swath of analytics activity, both that are vendor-based activities, but also at times and in places I'm able to have window into homegrown analytics and how they're used in tandem with vendor-provided solutions. And so that kind of broad spectrum of having been a practitioner and now working exclusively with practitioners from over 4 dozen institutions, then I'm able to kind of distill a lot of kind of insights from the community of practice. And that's partly why I think I was invited today to share, is because this is really about practice, not about like my role at Civitas. So hopefully that will come off that way. We're also going to be having some discussion, so just be prepared to turn on your camera and contribute. And it's good to see some familiar faces in the group today. I want to talk about LACE, which I don't know that the Evidence Hub is still like churning out. I don't know that the Evidence Hub is an active project for Doug and Rebecca, but Doug and Rebecca Ferguson, who were at the Open University in the United Kingdom, circa 2017, they basically said that there was these 4 critical questions that we needed to be able to look at and answer as it related to student success analytics being deployed in higher education. So whether or not analytics support learning was an unanswered question. It's from their standpoint, and they just said, look, we got to know, is there evidence that analytics support learning? Whether or not analytics support teaching, we want evidence for that. Whether or not analytics are deployed widely, and whether or not analytics are used ethically. And the interesting thing to me is deployed widely was something that when we started at Utah State with analytics, we kind of had this notion like deployed widely meant like deployed widely institution by institution. But what I started to realize is that it as often means, is it used widely within the institution? Are analytics, whether they're spun up homegrown or purchased from a vendor, are analytics able to be adopted and absorbed by the organization that they're a part of? And that's a critical question. And it was what my work was at Utah State in the Center for Student Analytics, and all the work that we did was really being a change agent to drive absorption and adoption of analytics best practices. And so my boss at the time, John Louviere, who's since moved on from Utah State, and many of you know John. John used to be on the steering committee for this community group. He kind of showed me this diagram, and he said, look, we have these 3 characteristics. Analytics can be cheap, they can be fast, or they can be good. And we're purchasing from a vendor, which means we're down in this box where they're fast and good, and they're not cheap. And that means that it's pricey. And even when you do it homegrown, turns out you end up in that same little zone. Usually, it's very, very rare to be able to get analytics out of that space, that little zone down there. And so he said, the real question isn't about the price. The real question is about the return on investment. And he said that to me even before I was hired in the interview process. He said to me, this position will be successful when it is able to answer the question, is there return on investment for getting into analytics? Whether you go through a vendor or build it homegrown, it's pricey. And is that price justified as an investment? And can we get a return? So he said, if you're going to be successful in this position, if you would get this position, I really want you to focus on that key question and answer that question and have your eye towards, are we getting a dollar for dollar or more than $1 return, dollar for dollar return on our investment in these tools? Well, the work that we did at Utah State was blessed by the influence of Dr. Kimberly Arnold, who used to be chair here in this community group. She used to be chair. And she wrote this great paper, which is only 4 pages, but this Building Institutional Capacities and Competencies paper, 2014 through LAC. And we treated that paper like our Bible, our analytics success Bible. And when I say we treated it like a Bible, we literally went through sentence by sentence, like chapter and verse, and we would just say, this sentence, are we operating based on that sentence's reality? Are we referring back to it? And are we making sure that we're accounting for that element? Because the 4-page paper is just full of these golden nuggets of insight about what ultimately is going to make analytics initiatives successful versus unsuccessful. And this is 3 of my favorite lines from the paper. The promise of educational technology to underpin and drive a transformative learning experience will not be delivered through a simple adoption process. Overnight successes and silver bullet solutions in the realm of learning analytics is highly unlikely. Generally, it is vital to deliver a message of persistence and dedication that in time will hopefully yield meaningful result. And that's exactly what we found, that it was through tenacity and collaboration that we are able to show ROI ultimately, but that it took that persistence and dedication that Kim is describing here in order to even approach it, because there are so many things that can go awry on the technological side of analytics, let alone the things that can go awry on the organizational side or the people side of analytics. And we were also advantaged at Utah State because we had this divisional mission statement for the Division of Academic Technology, which analytics was housed under, about this empowerment of people. And this is what it said. And we would print this. We had this, like, this was my mouse pad, and it was on the wall, and we gave copies to every new employee. And like, we got t-shirts that said this, and like, this was a mantra, and we lived by it. We believe everything we do in academic technology is about people. Working together, we provide the highest level of service to each other, our students, and our clients. Our overarching goal is to provide an organization where individuals are empowered to be successful. And that seeing analytics through that mantra meant that we had to be a highly people-oriented operation, that we couldn't be a highly technologically oriented operation. In the first place, we were outsourcing to a vendor, which made it so that we could focus on people. But in the second place, we knew that success was going to be through diplomacy, not through a technological sophistication. That diplomacy was going to win the day, and technology was going to be a vehicle, but not the goal, like not the driving force. And in this framework that just come out, EDUCAUSE released this in May, a framework for student success analytics, and we're going to look at a larger piece of it here in a minute. But this dichotomy between organizational issues related to the deployment of analytics and technical issues is addressed and is increasingly addressed in all of the literature surrounding what are we doing to make analytics initiatives successful campus to campus. One of the nice things is that these names on here, in terms of the authors, Tasha, Linda, Maureen, Marcia, Simon, Andy, Shannon, those are all people who are on this steering committee for this community group. And that is a reflection of this notion that we really want this community group to be about practitioners contributing their knowledge and insight and experiences to the community so that we all can benefit. But ultimately, when they wrote this, they decided to call out these organizational versus technical tensions of, you cannot just do a technological initiative without marrying that to an organizational initiative as well, that the two are hand in glove and never the twain shall part. Because you will at times I mean, I worked, before I came to Civitas, I worked as a consultant for about 3 years in my free time, in my spare time. And as you work with institutions in that capacity, as I've worked with institutions at Civitas, I cannot tell you how many honestly believe that flipping the switch on the software, that's it. That's the hard part. Flip the switch and then walk away, and it's going to hum and it's going to purr and it's going to do the silver bullet work for you. You just sit back and let it happen. And organizations that have that technological fallacy, there's a great book by I think it's Gerald Kane at the where is that from? MIT, Sloan School of Management, is that right? Where it's called The Technology Fallacy. And the whole book is about this idea that when you believe flipping a switch is the end of an organizational initiative, that's the fallacy. Flipping a switch is the beginning of a lot of work, and the organizational details are just as important. Now, I don't want you to just have to listen to me the whole time. So this question is for group discussion. And the best way to join the group discussion, if you're willing to be called on, is to turn your camera on or keep it on, because I'll call on you if there's silence. I'm looking at Mike already, like almost ready to call on him. So the question here is, how is your institution doing emphasizing the multiple aspects of analytics implementation, not just the technical aspects, in terms of organizational as well? Are there people who are willing to share? Because we'd love to hear varying perspectives.
Since you looked at me, Mitchell,
Yeah,
I feel
thanks, man.
obligated to have to talk. At Arizona State, I mean, very similar threads here, which is on your flipping the switch thing, which is like, you know, don't get lost in the process of what we're doing. Think about what you will do once we have it done. And, you know, I've always said, just, you know, imagine the solution, imagine it's done, imagine it's magic, and I, you know, snap my fingers and it's here. That'll happen. What are you going to do now? Right? If I give you a list of students that are showing signs of something, what are you going to do? Are you going to call them? Are you going to hand it to 10 other people? Are you going to call a meeting together? Like, what are you going to do once the analytics spit out valuable information? Because if you can't answer that question, you really shouldn't be doing the first part. You shouldn't be doing all the analytics work if you can't answer the, well, so what are you going to do about it? And we bring that up front. I'm in the CIO's office and work with lots of different aspects, both student and non-student. And we always start with, what are you going to do once this thing is done? Not how long will it take to build this thing? That's the wrong question to ask.
Yeah, love that. Love that. Stacey, I saw your camera turn on, and because I did you a favor recently, now you get to talk during my webinar. So what do you have to say about this topic? Oh, yeah.
Hi, everyone. Well, I'm kind of emerging in all of this, and I work for a community college that doesn't participate in any sort of analytics just yet. So not a ton to contribute, but I'm here for lots of learning.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I saw you turn your camera on. I wondered if you had something to say. Brad turned his camera on briefly. Brad Sheridan. Oh, Daniel Jensen, you're raising your hand. You go ahead.
Oh, yeah, real quick. So one thing too is just perceptions and biases. I did a dissertation on faculty's perceptions of predictive analytics, and there's a whole forefront there. You talk about like turning the switch on, you have the predictive analytics, you have these analytic tools, but you still have to combat people's perceptions of not trusting it or being leery of big data and those types of concerns.
Yeah, absolutely, Daniel. In fact, I would say that my full-time job at Utah State for those 5 years was helping people deal with the what we call cognitive ergonomics of operating around a predictive model, right? So if you sit in a badly designed chair, a poorly ergonomic chair, you get a sore back. It turns out that predictions are by their very nature poorly designed for mental and emotional processing. And so most people get a sore head when they have to operate in relationship to a prediction made by a machine. And that sore head and sore heart, those cognitive ergonomics, sorting that out and helping people have a better ergonomic experience, cognitive ergonomic experience with the predictive models that we were using, was a full-time job. There's so much change management in getting people to see that predictions by their very nature have a lot of weaknesses, have a lot of limitations, but that those limitations are not a barrier to using the prediction to do good on behalf of others. And also that they can be weaponized. Just like a hammer, right, can help you to do constructive things, it can also help you do destructive things. Analytics tools are no different. But that those cognitive ergonomics, and almost I called it like data therapy, right? Like, how does that data make you feel? Because my background as a therapist, like I was spending a lot of time having people lay on the couch and complain and say, oh, those predictions, like they're always so wrong. And it's like, well, yeah, remember 1 in 7 predictions that we make are wrong by design, because we're only 85% accurate on a prediction. So it's not, we don't have a crystal ball here, folks. Like 1 in 7 predictions is wrong. And we have to operate around that instead of, and remember that 6 out of 7 is correct. What can we do with the 6 out of 7, even though 1 in 7 is wrong? Those kind of cognitive ergonomics, they always came up. But those were the organizational elements that were people-based, emotions-based, ergonomic-based issues, aside from, data freshness and, whitelisting IP addresses and all the technical stuff that we were having to deal with. There was just as much people, if not more. In fact, I think at one point I said, I think my job's 75% dealing with people and 25% dealing with technology. Other thoughts before we continue on? Well, at Utah State, we got some good results. I don't have time to review all those, but for this last summer, the LASI event put on by the Society for Learning Analytics Research, SOLAR, I gave the keynote at that. And in that webinar, or that keynote, Enabling Evidence-Based Approaches to Student Success, I kind of rehearsed some of what went on at Utah State in terms of the successes we were able to chalk up. That link to YouTube is in the chat of our Zoom meeting today. So you can go and follow that and save it and go back and watch. But that's where I give a detailed explanation of how did we achieve the results we did at Utah State. The sum total of the results was 1.5 million a term in return on investment. And the operational cost in terms of paying a vendor for software, in terms of hiring a staff and having, a copy machine bill and printing stuff and, all the things that we did, was $850,000 of investment annually. Salaries, benefits, everything. And I include all that because if you only do the price of the software, you're kind of lying to yourself about how expensive what you're doing is. So my operational unit was $850,000 investment, but we were netting back about $3 million a year plus, $3 million plus. And by my math, that's around 4x ROI. And so we were really pleased with this. I started helping other universities also work towards those kinds of results, that scale of result, and also calculate that they're achieving. Like, how do you calculate that you're achieving ROI? How do you even get to those numbers? So I started working on that. Civitas heard from their other customers, like, oh, well, yeah, Mitchell helped us figure that out. Like, oh, well, Mitchell, he's the one who helped us figure that out. So they called and said, hey, will you come and be vice president for community practice? And I said, sure, I'd love to do that. And so now my role at Civitas is we have over 400 customers, but for those that use our predictive analytics, we're hovering around 90 to 100. And they're all over the United States, Canada. We have 6 in the United Kingdom. And what my job is now is to work with each of those individual customers to look at how productive users and intentional usage links to ROI, and to help them to do those calculations, because it turns out almost nobody at any institution is assigned to figure out how productive use of analytics is producing value for the university or the college or the institution. And so to step aside and to actually carry out those ROI assessments is actually it's a pretty heavy lift. So I'm kind of like an ROI concierge. That's a basic, basic definition of my job now. But the nice thing is as I find productive users and intentional usage, we also capture that and then cross-pollinate it amongst our community of users. So when I see ROI happening over in this corner of our community of users, I go, that's cool. How are you doing that? Like, show me the recipe. And then I can write the recipe card down, and then we can kind of hand the recipe card out to everyone and say, look at this recipe that so-and-so's doing. It's a great recipe for analytics usage. Here's the kicker. Productive users and intentional usage are predicated on something else entirely. It is true that by now, what we know in the 50 schools that I've helped do the ROI process in the last 18 months, we do not find ROI unless we have evidence of productive users and intentional usage. That arrow is it's the truest arrow you can, the link between those two boxes there, productive users and intentional usage leads to ROI. As often as we have seen productive users and intentional usage, we have found ROI. as often as we have found ROI, it is because there is productive users and intentional usage. So the real quicker is what's the antecedent, right? What leads to productive users and intentional usage? That's the real question. And the reason why it's a real question is because in the spread of 50, and these are kind of like just ballpark numbers, in the spread of 50 that I've helped in the last year or 18 months, there's this low functioning minority and the high functioning minority. And then there's kind of this well-functioning majority. Like there's a lot of people in the middle. There's a few who just haven't figured it out. And there's not a lot we can do to help. I mean, we try. It's not like we don't try, but like you have to have productive users and usage in order to get ROI. And really, what are the differences? Well, when we see a low functioning minority, what are we seeing there? We're seeing little to no usage. There's just no absorption. There's no adoption. There's all a myriad of reasons that could be a webinar in and of itself, like what leads to little to no usage after you've invested, whether it's homegrown or vendor purchased. That is something people need to be mindful of, and that could be a whole webinar of itself. But when there's little to no usage, there's no return on investment. In the middle, the well-functioning majority, there's what we see is a lot of what I would describe as tactical usage, but less strategic in nature. And that's what today's webinar is about, actually. How are we going to move from that well-functioning middle to the high-functioning minority? How are we going to make that transition? And I have some ideas for you about that. Actually, EducauseSSACG does. But what I see a lot at these customers is this tactical usage, but less strategic. And when we see that, we're able to mark up about a 1 to 2 times ROI, right? So they're barely able to recover their money, or maybe double it, but it's just not as impressive. And then when we see tactical and strategic usage, we see 4 to 5 times ROI. What do I mean by tactical? So these are kind of what we call strategy cards at Civitas. They're kind of blurry because they're released to our customers in any way. They're basically step-by-step, like here's your problem. A problem could be like students are waiting to register until the last minute. Here's an analytics-based action that you could undertake, and that we've seen undertaken at least one customer and undertaken successfully. And then here's the result that we marked up. That was the ROI result measured. And now you flip the card over and it has like your 1, 2, 3 step-by-step. Here's how you use the analytics to move from the problem to the solution. That's tactical. And the reason why it's tactical is because it's very oriented towards step-by-step, like understanding, like, I don't know, many of you probably learned math this way, where you learned what you have to do to manipulate the equation, but not why you're doing it. So you could like, I can follow the steps. I know how to derive something, but it's just because I do the steps. I just do the steps, but I don't really understand what's happening, right? That's very tactical. What do I mean by strategic? Well, strategic is more about getting what, how agreement. This is Clay Christensen from the Harvard School of Business. What, how agreement. So organizations can be in one of 4 boxes as it relates to what, how agreement. So the first box they can be in is low agreement on what the goals are and low agreement on the tactics that will get you there. And when you have an organization that's doing all different kinds of goals and all different kinds of tactics, that's dysfunctional. In fact, he calls it a police state. And he calls it a police state because he says when there's low agreement on both, everything gets done at the barrel of a gun. And maybe you've worked for a division or for an organization that is a barrel of a gun type leadership organization. And that's because there's no what, how agreement. The next and probably most common form of organizational, structure is really high agreement on the tactics that are deployed, which is like, oh, we know what recipes to follow, but low agreement on what the ultimate goals are and what the key, most important goals are. And so this leads to splintered outcomes because oftentimes the left hand is doing one tactic and it's running at cross purposes to what the right hand is doing. The less common, but still possible box to be in is to have really strong agreement on what the goals are, but no agreement on what the tactics should be. So high what agreement, low how agreement. It happens. And what you get there is isolated efforts, right? Where everyone's trying to work towards the same goal, but nothing's coalescing. And we do see this too, where retention is the goal, but everyone's kind of working on it in their own little way. And you're like, well, but there's no coalesce, there's no synergy. Okay, so that's a lack of synergy. The best place to be in is to have high agreement on what the goals are and on how to get there, and that's strategic thinking. That's what strategy is. It's not just the tactics, but it's this overarching picture of like, what are our goals and how are we going to organize ourselves as people, as professionals, to get where we want to go. So as it relates to that high functioning minority, that's what I see. I see both the tactical and the strategic high what how agreement on how to use analytics and make things happen. Brad in the chat, he says, our institution has challenges with silos, especially between academic affairs, student affairs, and lately marketing. Yeah, and these are headaches that are common, Brad. Like, we all know that tension between academic affairs and student affairs, where can we get them in the same room? And if we can, is it not just going to be one dean arguing with everyone every time after anyone speaks? Right? I have a running joke that deans are hired to be argumentative. That's what people look for is when they hire deans, is who can we get to argue with other people? And that dean's favorite pastime is to argue with one another. I love deans, but I do think I've run into too many argumentative ones. Well, at Civitas, we do have those tactical recipe cards or strategy cards that we cross-pollinate. But what happened for me was, when I looked at this high-functioning minority, I have background in both qualitative and quantitative approaches. And what I wanted to do was kind of do a thematic content analysis. Like, when I'm seeing this high-functioning minority, when it relates to their strategy, what is it? How are they organizing? What is it that they're doing? And I came up with this triangle, which I'm not going to explain in depth because, and I'll explain why I'm not going to explain in depth. But I saw these three phases, right? And there's some details on here, like the gold ball and the three little blue circles I'm not going to get into. But basically, it was like, there was a moment of analysis, there was a moment of broad leadership, and then there was a moment of smaller group tactical planning. And then that would lead back to further analysis, okay? So I developed this, and it was based on about 5 or 6 institutions where they were all doing this exact same thing. And the other institutions, even though they were well functioning, they weren't doing this. They weren't being this strategic. And I took this triangle and showed it back. Like, so I distilled this from my experiences with those institutions and then showed it back to them. And I said, have I read this right? Is this what you're doing? And one after the next, they said, yes, this is when we finally figured out how to do this triangle, is when things changed and when we picked up speed. And so I want you to know that it's not, it is validated through the fact that I wasn't looking for it when it kind of emerged. And then when I show it back to people, they go, yes. And in fact, it's gone through several iterations, because actually they've said, well, what you're missing is, and what you need is this. Okay, so I had this and I was working on this. I took it and I showed it to Marcia. Who was there, Marcia? You and Linda and Andy? It was the chairs meeting. So in the chairs meeting for the community group, we were on Zoom, and I said, hey, look at this. Isn't this interesting? And they said, yeah, that is interesting. It reminds us so much of that student analytics success framework that we just developed and published in May. And I was like, wait, hold on a second. So I
didn't mean to take the wind out of your sails.
No, it was beautiful. It was beautiful because I went and looked and I was like, oh, it's the same. It's the same. It's the same framework. Now, remember, this framework was developed by all those people I rattled off, like 12 people working. I mean, Marcia, how long did y'all work? Over a year, 18 months, was it?
I think we actually got it in a year.
In a year, yeah. And basically, just so that you could kind of see the analog here, these were my steps. So in my triangle, step 1 was analyze, right? Like, you need this moment of analysis. You need to sit down with your analytics. You really need to understand what they're telling you. Step 2 is then you need to take and do this preparedness. And it even says here, build coalitions. And that is definitely what I saw in stage 2 of my triangle, was this coalition building of broad conceptual, not tactical yet. I mean, this is the mistake that I see a lot of people making is they combine the coalition building with the tactic making. And that, I think, is a mistake. Tactics are good for small groups to design. When you ask a large group, like a town hall, to do tactics, it all falls apart. And it's called like coordinating by committee, right? You have 24 people in the room and nobody can agree on what the tactics are. So preparedness is almost about like coalition building. And I also call it like cabbage throwing. Like you want to take your little analysis that you've done out on tour and like kind of get people to throw cabbage at it so that it can get stronger. And then once you have prepared the group or the community or the town hall, then in my triangle, you move into making actual decisions, like getting down to the tactics of how are we going to actually carry out the work, and how are we going to get people to give us the thumbs up so that there will be accountability so that we can follow up. And of course, all of the decisions are geared towards pursuing outcomes, which of course are measured. In my triangle, outcomes and analysis are combined. And the reason is because for me, outcomes are analysis. But I actually am converted to this model now. I think this is a better model because in this model, what it says is you need to be outcomes focused throughout the cycle, not just at the end. And it says, be sure to consider how one student's success variable may inadvertently affect other students' success outcomes. Partly that's what I was talking about cabbage throwing, is that a lot of times people will raise their hand and be like, do you realize that if you try to start this and that it's not going to work because this other thing of the university is going to break. And I think that that's why I like this model better, is because it forces you to be outcomes focused throughout the process. Now, what you'll notice is that while mine's in order, theirs is actually a spiral. They don't number them. I would number them this way, 1, 2, 3, 4, or really returning to 1. But when they developed it, they didn't. And I asked I said, hey, why what's this spiral business? Like, why aren't they in order? And they said, because it is iterative. You may begin with analysis and move to preparedness and realize that you need to go back to analysis. You may get all the way to decisions and then realize your outcome is wrong because the state appropriations legislature just changed the way that they're going to fund you. And so even though you had a decision, now your outcome has changed and you need to go back and mediate your decision a little bit better. So that all of these things can be happening simultaneously. They don't necessarily have to happen in a discrete order. I don't, in those 5, 6 high functioning schools, they did happen discretely and iteratively. But what I would say is that there's a fuzzy 1 around analysis, a fuzzy 2 around preparedness, a fuzzy 3 around decisions, and a fuzzy 4 around outcomes. But that's just my opinion. I actually would be interested, for those that helped create it, can you speak to this spiral? Because this spiral emerged. You originally had them in an order. Why did you alter it to a spiral? Because I love it.
Well, Mitchell, this is Maureen. I would say one of the points that arose as we were looking at the domains was that you might have a boatload of data. And so you just think naturally, I need to go all in on analysis. Or frankly, if your provost is saying, use this data, leverage these data to start making some decisions or some data-informed recommendations, that just might be where you enter the process. And then the other 3 domains are available.
Yeah. So you always have options, that you don't have to be stuck in a discrete path from analysis to outcomes, but that you always can iterate and go back. And I think that's actually realistic. It's why I think it's a better model than my triangle.
We also realize that sometimes the outcomes and the decisions, like this is where we want to go, and this is, who needs to be involved, and so on and so forth. Like you're at that point, and then you go back to, okay, what's our data? Like, it's just really muddy. You might even be doing some of 2 at the same time that kind of overlap. So we just really didn't want to pigeonhole, this is the structure of how it needs to go. Yeah. It's really context related.
Oh, Linda, I was hoping you would come on camera and hear your
Yeah. So one thing I also wanted to add is that it is so important that all the stakeholders do see that there are these 4 or however many different aspects to it, because oftentimes I have seen institutions get kind of stuck where they might think that, hey, if I go through with this initial analysis, I'm going to somehow mar the institution's strategy. And so they get very afraid to move forward. But knowing that this is just a step along the way, and that after we do an initial analysis and see something, we can then evaluate where we are and go back around and use that to inform another round and get more buy-in and get more input. So I think that's actually worked really well.
Yeah, I love that. So this is the main point of the webinar. What I'm about to say. I wasn't looking for a strategic model of social organizing and found one. And then validated it with those 6 institutions who were high functioning and said, is this right? And they said, yes, that's right. I wasn't looking for another model that would cross-validate those same concepts, and ran into one amongst my close colleagues and friends here, and that they had developed. And then I go, oh, it's the same thing. And so if you want to be successful with student success analytics in this post-secondary field, what is on the screen right now should be of great interest to you. And the other cool thing is that this is the visualization for the framework, but the framework's actually a whole white paper, right? And it's on a website. You can go read it. It's linked in the chat right now. It's the second link. And it is a good read. It is thoughtfully written. It is practitioner oriented, which it's from the field, right? It's not theory. It was produced and emerged from practice and from experience and from error. And I am now like a fan. Like this is better. Like I like my triangle, like, because I was along for the ride when I built it. And I do actually think there's some elements to my triangle that like secret like sauce that's like Civitas secret sauce or whatever. Like what's that gold ball about? And what are those 3 circles? I'm not going to tell you. But the framework is robust. This framework, EducauseSSACG framework, and I would pay close attention to it. Now, you might be saying. You might be saying, how, if I'm not quite there yet, and I also have noticed that maybe I'm not in that what-how agreement, if I'm not in the strategic box, if I'm in that well-functioning majority or low-functioning minority, you might be in an institution where you're just pulling your hair out. If you want to move towards high functioning, my advice to you is, and you want to get that 4 to 5 times ROI. My advice to you is that you really need to take this model seriously, but there is a tool that you can use called the Analytics Capability Self-Assessment, also linked in the chat. I don't know that it's unfortunate, but it is behind a paywall. It is for EDUCAUSE members. It's an EDUCAUSE members resource. So you would either need to be an EDUCAUSE member yourself individually, or be affiliated with an institution that is an EDUCAUSE member and have that on your EDUCAUSE profile so that you have access. But this capability self-assessment basically looks at these 5 domains of strategic functioning within like, as you're trying to do analysis, preparedness, decisions, and outcomes, like what are the workforce issues related to that? What are the governance issues related to that? What is the data management issues related to that? There's 26 items. And then you kind of get back like low, moderate, high indicators of where you're at with those domains, just so that you can have a notion of like, what is this capability stuff? I love it, by the way. Like it's one of the favorite things I've taken as it relates to student success analytics. This is just an example of one of the items. This is in the leadership domain, item 3, leadership prioritization of institutional strategy and use of it to inform departmental analytics strategies. And this is how the whole survey works. Every item has 3 options, kind of like option 0, option 1, and 2. And that's like level 0 functioning, level 1 functioning, level 2 functioning. So you kind of just read. There's little or no clear alignment on institutional strategy related to data and analytics. If they exist, analytics strategies exist at department or division level only. senior analytics leaders may not link departmental goals to institutional goals. In other words, there's low goal agreement on the what, how agreement, right? Selection number 1 is not 0, but 1 now. Key institutional goals exist with explicit connections to analytic strategies and so forth. And then 2 is the highest functioning. The bottom item is the highest functioning. And you go through and you answer all the things, and then you can kind of see like, oh, this is where we're functioning. Here's my favorite part. This is why I think this assessment is so cool. Say I answered 2 on this item, and I wasn't satisfied with that. And I was like, man, what can I do to up level? Or I'm sorry, I'm being confusing because I said 0, 1, and 2. Say I'm in the middle here. Key institutional goals exist, etc. And I want to up level. And the cool thing is when I ask the question, well, how do I up level? The answer is in the item. If you want to move down to the bottom one, you know what you need to do? You need to explicit your departmental and data analytics strategies, explicitly link them to institutional goals, right? And if you'll go and do that and to have meetings around how are divisional departmental strategies linked to the institutional goals, you'll be able to check that box. The next thing is senior analytics leaders always link their departmental strategies to institutional strategy. If you're not doing that, or if you work in a unit that's not doing that, you take this and you say, hey, why aren't we doing this? I used to have, by the way, just in alignment with this, at Utah State, I had a cabinet above my desk, you know, the kind where you open it up, there's like your snacks are in there, and like over there is a whole big stack of papers or whatever. Okay, there was 4 cupboard doors. On the first cupboard was my unit's mission statement and charter. On the second cupboard door was the divisions as led by my vice president. On the third cupboard door was the presidential priorities for the current cycle, legislative cycle. And on the fourth cupboard door was the university seal. And on the university seal, it said teaching, research, and service, which was the university's mission. So in those 4 cupboard doors, on the front of them, I had my unit, the Center for Student Analytics, my division, academic technology, my president, my current president and legislative cycle, and the university goals. And I did that, and I could refer to them. I would be in a meeting with people, and I'd turn and say, well, you know, the president or the vice president, or, well, you know, our presidential seal, the logo that is on the mace that is carried during graduation, research, teaching, and service, right? Like, I could articulate those alignments. And so when I responded to item 3 of the leadership domain, I was able to check the bottom box. But if you're not able to check the bottom box and you want to move down, the cool thing about this survey is every single item is that exact same way. When you're not functioning at the higher levels, it literally is a laundry list of what you need to do at the higher level to function at the higher level. So I would endorse that. I want to ask, this is kind of the meat, like that this framework exists, that it's worthy of consideration, that there are assessments that you can use to kind of deepen your conversation. The one thing that I kind of want to end on in terms of like a group discussion here is cool, Mitch, like you like this. That's cool that you like it. What barriers do you face in taking a more strategic approach? As you think about like, oh, what am I going to do? How am I going to enact this? What are the barriers that you guys anticipate? In the meantime, Mike says, I wanted to share another lens on how to make progress. It's grassroots and prototyping. I've seen success with this approach. Building a simple prototype of a dashboard or predictive model is a great way to show folks the art of possible and then get buy-in. Actually, Mike, it's good that you said that because I actually didn't have this framework to benefit from or use the triangle in order to get our results. I used more of this prototyping and guerrilla tactics of a lot of one-on-one meetings. The downfall of a one-on-one approach or guerrilla approach is that as soon as the person leaves, those results tend to diminish. And I've seen that place after place after place after place. So what's on the screen, this framework is a sustainable way to go about like what I was doing I was running around pale and sweaty, like doing all these one-on-one meetings, pounding the pavement. But as soon as I left, there's like this vacuum created because the next person isn't hired, like on their job description, it doesn't say person, minimum requirement, willing to be pale and sweaty and run around campus having one-on-one meetings with everyone and their dog, right? Like So you can't hire necessarily replace that. But I do agree that there's this prototyping and buy-in, and like there is a different way to go about it. But let's talk about barriers. What are the barriers that you face in taking a more strategic approach?
I want to kind of speak to that, Mitchell, and also speak to what Mike said about the prototyping. I know for me, trying to get people on board with creating a structure for learning analytics and the infrastructure needed for the data to be put into places where we can access it and blah, 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 all this kind of stuff. It was hard for them to visualize what I was talking about. So what we've done is put the creation of a prototype, so to speak, as part of our strategy. So in the preparedness, in that strategy piece, this is strategy one. We have our team together, this is what we're doing, and then we're going to test it and show it off, and hopefully that will create a little bit of a buy-in. I'm wondering how you see that as part of what you're talking about here, Mitchell. Because I agree that sometimes people just need to see what you're talking about. They just...
Yeah, I think what I would say is that I think that that's part of the analysis and preparedness phases. Like what we're kind of saying there is that sometimes you have to bootstrap analysis and preparedness so that eventually decisions can be reached. Eventually decisions can be like, you're kind of anteing up and saying, okay, well, let's ante up. Let's see if we can get some interest based on this initial investment. And then if we can move to those decisions and we can move to those outcomes. A lot of times you run a pilot for that purpose so that your outcomes can act as the preparing agent so that further decisions can be made, right? So in that way, the spiral is actually really instructive because it helps you to think that in the early stages, when there are more barriers, because maybe you don't have leadership that has coalesced around the value of analytics or anything, that those pieces of the strategic puzzle can be done in any kind of order as you're trying to just be really scrappy. Is that consonant with your experience, Marcia?
Yeah, it really is. I just that is a strategy, but I see it as still part of this framework.
It's in the soup, isn't it?
Yeah, it is definitely in the soup.
Yeah. Other barriers to moving in this more strategic direction, in having this bigger view.
Mitchell, I'd point out for us, when we first started down this path, we had a lot of energy in the different collaborating units across campus, and we had people who were willing to, set other projects aside and really get behind this. And the thing that we're kind of running into as we're starting to do this iteration and this ongoing analysis and learning process is that maintaining that energy and maintaining that collaborative environment is not always easy as other things kind of creep in, or people start to become cynical or skeptical on whether or not this is actually going to work. So keeping that momentum, is something that we're really kind of struggling with, but we're trying not to lose sight of it as well and figure out how to come back together, share insights, do some kind of design thinking sessions with our end users and have this back and forth. But that's really been a big challenge for us.
Yeah. Sarah says, how do you prioritize? And actually, that's one of the reasons why I like the triangle, is because the triangle forces you to say, okay, we're going to generate just a few insights using the tools. We're going to take those insights to conceptual breadth, and we're going to take that conceptual breadth and feedback to a tactical plan. We're going to do a tactical plan, initiate that, hold ourselves accountable, cycle back to further analysis of how it went, and then carry on from there. So part of the reason why I think a discrete path can can be a little more helpful is because it does force you to prioritize and to get your ducks in a row and to just follow through until everything's done. The spiral, I think, is a lot more realistic, though, frankly. The spiral is just, honestly, there's no discrete path to success with analytics. The other thing I want to say is that a lot of times I think well-functioning is the enemy. Because it's like, well, look, we're getting good results. We're being tactical. We know how to be tactical. Like, we're going to do one-off tactical stuff for the rest of forever. And it's like, oh, okay, yeah, that's good. And you'll get some ROI from that. But I do think that sometimes the good is the enemy of the better, right? Because it's good. We're already doing good. Like, why would we need to do better? And it's like, well, it's not that much more effort to move in this kind of way. So I do think that that's another additional barrier. Well, that's all the time we have for today. With intention, I put a lot of the links in the chat, understanding that people would want to follow up. You can reach out to me. You can reach out to Marcia, who's chair of the community group, or any of the people who are listed as authors on the framework. They would love to dialogue with you, I am sure. And obviously connect with us via LinkedIn. Make sure you're a part of the community group. Thank you for being here, and we'll send out a recording. I'm sure it will be available. So check the Slack channel.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Jason Nicholas, for putting together organizing this webinar, and thank you, Dr. Culver, for this fabulous presentation. It will be the recording will be posted in our Connect channel on EDUCAUSE Connect page. So if you've not joined in there, please feel free to do so. I think I have. Yep, there's our link. If you have not already gone there, check us out there. That's where you'll see the recording. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope to hear from you and work with you soon.